Hello, this is Max. Today, I will tell you a story about how a group of young people found themselves in the past. One of them fell in love with a queen, and they participated in a medieval battle. You can subscribe to the channel after watching. It helps us a lot in realizing the content. An elderly man drives through the desert and nearly hits an injured man who appears out of nowhere. The dying man utters the word castle guard before being taken to the hospital, where he later dies. After examining the body, the attending physician, Dr. Kova, reports to the sheriff that the deceased man's organs were disarranged. The only item found on the man is a medallion with the letters IDC inscribed on it. A man named Frank Gordon from IDC claims the corpse of the deceased man, Vincent Taub. Meanwhile, Robert Doniger instructs Frank to retrieve Vincent's body and records urgently. Robert asks if Decker was with Vincent, but Frank states that Vincent was alone. Robert expresses concern that if news of Vincent's death spreads, it would ruin IDC. They speculate about how Vincent ended up in the desert, with Robert bluntly attributing his death to stupidity. At the hospital, the sheriff asks Frank about the meaning of castle guard, the only word spoken by the dying man, but Frank denies any knowledge of it. In France, Professor Edward Johnston leads an archaeological excavation near Leur Oak Castle in the village of Castle Guard. He explains to his students, including his son Chris, how the French drove the English out of France in that area during the 100 Years' War. Scottish archaeologist André Marek adds that the execution of Commander Arnaud's sister, Lady Claire, contributed to France's victory against the English in the war. Later, Chris expresses concern to his father about their sponsor, Doniger, spending excessive money on the ditch. Edward plans to travel to America to question Doniger. He warns Chris not to tell anyone, especially Kate Erickson, indicating that he is aware of his son's infatuation with his student. Edward believes their relationship won't work because Kate is dedicated to archaeology while Chris wants nothing to do with it. Chris approaches Kate while she is digging the tunnel, hoping she has noticed his feelings for her. However, Kate rejects his offer for a beer, citing his status as the boss' son. The following day, Chris meets Marek at the monastery ruins and shares his frustrations about archaeologists being overly fixated on the past, which he believes contributed to his parents' separation. Marek argues that the past is valuable and takes Chris to see a 600-year-old sarcophagus depicting a French knight with one ear holding his wife's hand, a rare practice during that era. Marek emphasizes that archaeology helps people understand their origins and where they are headed. An alarm sounds due to a cave-in at the monastery. Kate and Marek investigate and find oilskin containing documents and a damaged stone relief. As the monastery caves in again, Marek discovers a bifocal lens on the floor and takes it. Josh Stern reveals that the bifocal lens belongs to Edward and presents a signed document from the professor, pleading for help. The team debates the possibility, as Edward has only been missing for 2 days. However, Josh insists that carbon dating confirms the lens and document to be over 600 years old. Chris contacts IDC to inquire about his father's whereabouts. They invite the team to their headquarters in New Mexico instead. The team arrives at the IDC main office, where Kramer informs them that Doniger is developing a teleportation machine and demonstrates the device. Kramer guides them to a room where they find the prototype of a teleportation machine. They learned that while attempting to teleport a document from New Mexico to New York, they stumbled upon a wormhole locked to 1357 in Castle Guard. Doniger arrives and reveals that Edward, the professor, wanted to experience the past firsthand and is now trapped in the 14th century. He urges the team to go back in time immediately to rescue him, as locating him will become increasingly difficult with the passage of time. Doniger admits that the funding for their excavation at Castle Guard was driven by the presence of the wormhole, which raised Edward's suspicions. Frank interrupts, stating that they have already prepared the machine and his men are ready to accompany the team. However, Doniger insists on joining the mission to find Decker, much to Decker's dismay. Before leaving, Kramer reminds Doniger of the risks involved in traveling through the wormhole, but Doniger dismisses his concerns, highlighting that it is the team's first trip compared to Taub, who has passed through it 10 times. Kramer argues that the team has a right to know, but Doniger disregards his request. In a private conversation, Chris confronts Frank about leaving his father behind in the 14th century. Frank explains that he had to leave Edward to avoid getting trapped himself. Frank instructs the team to undergo a medical examination and dress in period-appropriate clothing. He introduces his former Marine colleagues, Bill Barreto and Jimmy Gomez, explaining that they will be needed if things go wrong. Josh decides to stay behind due to his fears about the consequences of wormhole travel. However, the team persuades Francois, who speaks fluent French, to join them. Kramer instructs the team not to bring any modern technology or weapons and provides pendant markers that can be used to call for their return. He explains that the markers have a lifespan of 6 hours. Doniger takes Francois' glasses, stating they didn't exist in that time period, and warns them about potential discomfort during the journey. The team steps onto the machine while Doniger, Kramer, and Josh observe. As the device activates, the team experiences intense pain as they are transported back in time. They arrive in 1357, where Frank leads them to the forest and instructs them not to activate their markers until they find Edward. Suddenly, a woman runs past them, pursued by English knights. The team hides, but one of the knights, Sir William Bequer, kills Jimmy before he can conceal himself. Bequer orders his men to locate the others and identify them. Marek, Chris, and Kate witness a knight shooting an arrow at Bill. Bill, wounded by the arrow, activates his marker to return to the present. As he reappears, the grenade he had primed detonates, destroying the teleportation machine. Marek escapes with Kate in a different direction to evade the knight's pursuit. Once the knights have left, the remaining team members regroup and discover that the Marines died during the skirmish. Frank examines Jimmy's body and realizes that his marker has disappeared. A frightened Francois contemplates activating his marker, but Frank stops him, explaining that they need at least 40 feet of clearance for the device to work. Frank emphasizes the importance of not losing their markers at any cost, and they set out to find Marek. Marek finds refuge in a concealed cave, where he encounters the woman. As the knights search the area, the French suddenly arrive and attack the English. Marek takes up the sword of a fallen knight and kills the Englishman who tried to capture the woman. He is disturbed by his actions, but the woman gestures for him to follow her. In the present, Josh demands to know the whereabouts of his teammates, but Doniger admits that he is unaware. However, he assures Josh that IDC has a backup plan. Marek and the rest of the team reunite, and the woman leads them to Castle Guard, which is under English control. They realize that they have arrived on April 4, 1357, during the French siege of La Roque. They hurriedly make their way to the castle to search for Edward. In the present, Josh discovers that the markers are the only things keeping the wormhole open, and that his teammates will be trapped in the past once the markers expire. Meanwhile, the team arrives at the square, where they are spotted by the English knights. A chase ensues as the knights pursue them through the narrow passage. Lord Oliver de Vans interrogates the team after they are brought before him. He reveals that Edward has also been captured when he notices Marek's Scottish origin and comments on the sudden interest of the Scots in the area. Marek identifies Edward as their master and explains that they have come to find him. Oliver questions Francois, and upon discovering his French identity, his men become hostile. Marek insists that Francois is their interpreter, but Oliver doesn't believe him and has his knight kill Francois, shocking the group. The team is then imprisoned, and Chris realizes that he has lost his marker. Kate discovers Edward sleeping behind a curtain, and they are reunited. Edward reveals that the English found him in the monastery but spared his life after he lied about being able to create Greek fire, a highly flammable substance that could change the course of history. Marek argues against creating Greek fire, as it could alter the outcome of the war. While discussing their escape plan, Frank informs them that they need to go to the field to be able to use their markers. As they search for openings in their prison, a guard below them hears the noise and attempts to stab through the roof, narrowly missing Frank. Meanwhile, Marek spots the woman being escorted into the prison. Kate finds a hole big enough to crawl through but faces resistance from Chris. However, Frank convinces them that Kate is the only one who can fit and instructs her to go. Before climbing out, Kate shares a kiss with Chris and begins crawling up the roof. However, she loses her balance upon spotting a soldier and starts sliding down. Fortunately, Chris grabs her and saves her by pulling her through the straw. Kate steadies herself, finds a foothold, and swings herself inside the prison, where she stabs the guard. Another guard arrives to attack, but Kate unlocks the door, allowing the team to escape. They kill the pursuing Englishman and flee outside. Marek chooses to stay behind to rescue the woman. In the present, IDC and Josh work on repairing the machine while Marek navigates the prison. He kills a guard just as Dikir arrives and attacks him. Marek takes refuge in the room where the woman is and asks her to help reinforce the door. While Dikir attempts to break through the door, Marek and the woman escape to the river. Elsewhere, Kate refuses to leave without Marek, but Frank reminds her that his job is to retrieve the professor and not look after them. He proposes that they either go and find Marek or follow him. They realize they have only 2 hours left until their markers expire. At the same time, Kramer detects a faint signal from one of the markers, indicating that their teammates are still alive. The team heads to the field, debating whose marker to use. Kate refuses to use hers, as she is waiting for Marek, but they suggest they can return for him. However, they encounter English knights and are forced to flee. In the river, Marek and the woman discuss the impending fall of the castle. She believes the fortress will stand for many more years, while Marek is convinced it will collapse that night. They hear the approach of English soldiers and quickly make their way back to shore. French knights intercept them, and Marek realizes that the woman is Lady Claire. Meanwhile, the English launch an attack on the French base, and Claire escapes into the woods, pursued by some knights. Marek continues his journey to Castle Guard but is surrounded by English soldiers. Dikir confiscates Marek's pendant and knocks him out, dumping him onto the wagon where Frank and Edward are tied. Frank and Edward inform Marek that Chris and Kate have been killed. Dikir then kills Frank, who recognizes him. Dikir reveals his true identity as William Decker, a former IDC employee. He explains that Doniger failed to inform them about the dangers of wormhole travel and that each journey alters their DNA. Dikir can no longer return to the present because he would die during the return trip, and he claims the past as his home. Dikir throws Frank's marker away and orders Edward and Marek to create Greek fire, threatening to kill them otherwise. After Dikir leaves, Edward realizes that Dikir has taken Marek's marker, leaving them with no means of escape. Meanwhile, Kate and Chris arrive at the monastery and seek the monk's help in rescuing Edward. The monk allows them inside. Dikir takes Marek and Edward to Larok, where Edward completes the Greek fire as ordered. Marek reveals that he altered history by saving Lady Claire, much to Edward's surprise. Oliver and Dikir observe the French army preparing for the siege from atop the castle. At the monastery, Kate and Chris are led to the chamber where the tunnel is said to be. They find the passage that Kate and Marek explored during the cave-in. Kate discovers Edward's note and glasses in the oilskin and decides to leave them behind to find in the future. She realizes that the tunnel is located behind the stone relief, which she had inadvertently destroyed. Before entering the tunnel, Kate asks one of the monks to inform Arnaut. The French continue their attacks on the castle, using trebuchets to launch their assault. In the tunnel, Kate and Chris reach a dead end. Arnaut and his 20 men make their way to the monastery, following the information about the tunnel that will lead them to victory. In the present, Kramer discovers Doniger gathering the team's belongings and realizes that he is not willing to help them return. Doniger explains that he is protecting the company's interests and pushes Kramer, causing him to hit his head on a steel rod. Marek learns that Claire has been kidnapped and is about to be hanged to force the French to surrender. Fueled by rage, Marek decides to rescue her, regardless of the potential consequences on history. Arnaut and his men reach the end of the tunnel and encounter Chris and Kate. Suspicious at first, Arnaut is about to kill them when Chris and Kate explain that they are on the same side. Marek threatens to blow up the castle using his torch infused with Greek fire if Claire is not released. Dikir tries to stop him, but Marek throws the torch, causing an explosion. The blast clears the tunnel, allowing French soldiers to approach the castle. Arnaut and Oliver engage in a fight, which is interrupted midway. Marek attempts to untie Claire, but Dikir attacks him. They end up rolling down the battlements, fighting each other. Oliver gains the upper hand in his fight against Arnaut, about to deliver the final blow, but Chris intervenes and knocks him down. Enraged, Oliver targets Chris, but Arnaut takes advantage of the situation and kills Oliver. Kate and Edward open the castle gates, allowing French soldiers to pour in. Marek fights fiercely against Dikir, who slashes off Marek's ear. However, Dikir becomes distracted by the approaching French soldiers. Realizing that Dikir was the knight in the sarcophagus, Marek finds renewed strength and mortally wounds him. Below, Kate, Edward, and Chris attempt to use the marker, but it fails to activate. Chris discovers that Marek's marker was taken by Dikir. He runs to Marek, while Kate and Edward proceed to the field outside the castle. Marek searches for his marker on Dikir's body. In his dying moments, Dikir asks Marek to take him home. Marek throws his marker to Chris and decides to stay behind, stating that he has already found his home as he looks at Claire. In the present, Josh locks Doniger out of the office. However, Doniger manages to enter the machine to stop the teleportation, but it closes before he can intervene, indicating that the team activated the marker. Meanwhile, Chris reunites with Kate and Edward, but they are charged by a knight. Suddenly, Doniger is transported to 1357, where the charging soldier kills him. Chris, Kate, and Edward safely return to the present and are greeted by a devastated Josh, who realizes that Francois and Marek did not make it back. The team returns to the castle guard excavation, where they re-examine the sarcophagus and discover that Marek and Claire led long and happy lives, having 3 children together: Catherine, Christophe, and Francois. So, what do you think of this movie? Write your thoughts in the comments under the video, and also do not forget to put a like and subscribe to the channel. Goodbye.